So, James, thank you so much for joining me. And which country, which time zone are you on today?
So I'm a rare occurrence. I'm actually in home base. I'm in the UK at the moment. I've just come back from 6 weeks speaking on the road and heading off to Paris tomorrow to go and speak in there. But thankfully today I'm in terra firma. I'm in the UK.
I don't know why you bother having a home base. You're never there.
Well, I think it is because deep in my roots, my family history. You look at my family tree. We were actually gypsies going way back, gypsies from Essex and Kent. So I think there's something about the traveling, having that love of travel and moving that obviously goes back to all those centuries ago.
Fantastic. And actually, you're very lucky because you travel with your wife, don't you? Which not everybody may know. Now, is the wife also the boss?
She is always the boss. Of course, she's the boss. Absolutely, absolutely. I think I had a very fun evening the other night. I was speaking in Singapore, and I was hanging out with a number of other speakers who also have their partners who are involved in their businesses as business managers. So there's people like Ron Kaufman, a great speaker on customer experiences. His wife Jen is his business partner. We got Brenda Bentz, who's a great speaker. Formerly, I think she was at Coca-Cola. Her husband Daniel, who came from a very high up big company, and he came to become her business manager. So I think it's actually, you're seeing it more and more now, a lot of these kind of couples coming together. And as long as you work out like who does what, you don't step on each other's toes, then it can actually be a really good combination.
Fantastic. And also the traveling's not as bad because you're not missing each other. But let's go back a bit. Let's go back to your early career, because we'll come into speaking a bit later. But you started in music, and I really want you to do some name dropping here, some mic dropping. Tell us the story. How did you get into music? What's the background there?
So my father is a musician, a great jazz musician, and my grandfather was a musician as well. Initially, when I first left school, I was going to get into the world of music, being a professional drummer, but I actually found I loved the business side of things. So when I was around about 18, 19, I started managing artists. And one of the very first artists I managed was a band called Deacon Blue, a pop band from the United Kingdom, sold about 6 million albums. And also Ricky Ross, who's the songwriter now, who's a very successful songwriter for other people like James Blunt as well. So that got me into that world. And I started really managing, being a little bit like you work with speakers, the person behind the scenes. I was the consigliere to many of these great artists. And from there, I started working with members of the Rolling Stones, people on the jazz side, people like Jamie Cullum, on the classical side, Bryn Terfel. I'm just about to go to Paris. So even older generations, people like Sacha Distel. I don't know if you remember Sacha Distel, who was married to Brigitte Bardot or engaged to Brigitte Bardot. So Sacha and I had built up a very good relationship together. And then I moved to California in 2010. And I had this mixture. My job was in Silicon Valley. So I had this mixture of working with music artists and also working in technology. And that was a really nice blend. I enjoyed doing that. So I got to work with people like Nathan East, who's the bass player with Eric Clapton, and Phil Collins, people like Luis Conte, who works with Madonna and the Eagles, and lots of other music artists. So it was an interesting time. I learned a lot about building brands during that time.
Wow. I mean, fantastic. I thought I could name drop, but I mean, you're amazing. So tell me, why would you move from that really exciting, it must be a really exciting world, into speaking? What crazy thought happened there?
Well, I don't know if you find this, but I find a lot of speakers, it's not something we plan necessarily. We can fall into it in different ways. Politicians, they lose their political job as a cabinet minister or whatever their job is, and then they get asked to go and speak on the road. Or CEOs, they finish, managing these huge companies, and they get asked to go and speak. For me, I know I got an inquiry to go and speak at a conference in San Francisco when we was living at the time. And it was a conference all about subscription-based websites or services. So I was speaking, there was a lady there from the Financial Times, which had very successfully moved into the media industry and having a very successful subscription model. But then I was also there speaking with someone from eHarmony, the online dating site as well, who also has a subscription-based site. So I come from understanding that a lot of that online marketing side of things. So I just got asked to speak more and more. And then, people then said, oh, you can get paid for this thing that you're doing all the time. I'm like, oh, okay, really? Tell me how that works. And so really, I hit a big birthday, one of those birthdays with a 0 on the end. And I decided, now's the time to make that next chapter in my life, which is really about speaking. And that was just under 2 years ago.
Yeah, in fact, your journey's been super fast, and we'll go into that a little bit more later. But why the topic of creativity? Because obviously you say your experience is online marketing, your experience is music, you've done technology, you've done all sorts of things. What is it about creativity that attracted you, and why is that the topic?
I remember seeing, when I was about 14, going to an event and seeing Tony Robbins speak. And like lots of speakers have seen Tony, it's entertainment. It's a great show. And he's also a very powerful speaker, very powerful communicator. So I liked that. I like seeing someone up on stage speaking, but I also sense that that's not my style. I'm not that type of, people book me a lot of time as being a motivational speaker, but I don't consider myself, more maybe inspirational, but not necessarily motivational. So I liked what I saw there, but the topic was not my topic. But then about 6 months later, I went and saw a completely different type of speaker called Sir Edward de Bono. Edward de Bono was a specialist in creative thinking. Now, he could be further removed from Tony Robbins' style. Edward sat there, sat in a chair like a professor, an Oxford professor, which he had been, and he would draw on what was called an overhead projector at that point, an acetates overhead projector, and it was projected onto a screen behind him. So there was no fireworks in the way that he spoke, but his ideas were dazzling for me. And I loved how he spoke about creativity, this potential that we all have. And I remember sitting at that point, probably 15 years of age, and saying, I love this topic. I didn't know what I wanted to do with the topic. But then I just found that as I got more and more in the world of work, I found myself what you sometimes call a shadow artist. So I was working with very creative people all the time, whether those people were musicians or whether they were great marketers or whether they were great people on the legal side, the finance side. And so I just love working with really creative people. But then as I got to speak to more and more about people about creativity, I realized that most people don't consider themselves to be creative. And this blew my mind. And I thought, well, this is a huge waste of human capital, human potential. And when I decided I finally wanted to go and speak, I thought there must be something around this idea of creativity, innovation, which I come from as well, and also artificial intelligence, which is what I get brought in a lot to speak about artificial intelligence and how that relates to business today.
That's brilliant. But you've actually coined your own version of creativity. You call it super creativity.
Yeah.
Can you tell me a little bit about that?
So it's funny, sometimes I was looking for this, a phrase or a word that encapsulated, when I speak about creativity, but I don't really speak about it in the kind of artistic sense of people doing painting and drawing. I may cover a little bit of that, but primarily my audience is the business community. I speak to large companies, rooms of all different types of industries. And so I was trying to find a word that was not about necessarily the artistic side of creativity, but really what I talk about is this idea of how you can augment human creativity with artificial intelligence and machine learning. So bringing technology and human creativity together. And I was speaking at an event in Laguna Beach in California. My wife and I are just walking down the street, and we're talking about this idea, like something here, and we couldn't get a word for it. And I came up with this idea of super creative, being super creative, how you can really take your creativity to an entirely new level, whether that's as a team or an individual or as a company. And it worked, and I started testing it on people. But then I met a gentleman, Ron Kaufman, who I mentioned earlier, and Ron said, no. He said, you need to make it not super creative, but super creativity. Make it into a verb. And that was okay. That's it, super creativity. And it's all one word. And in fact, funny enough, where I'm speaking today, there's another a performer here that lives very close to where I'm speaking from you today. He was a friend of my wife's. His partner's a friend of my wife's. His name's Ricky Gervais. He's a comedian.
I love Ricky.
Ricky's amazing. And we saw one of his test shows that he was doing the other day in North London. And so I come up with this idea of super creativity, and I put it out there and I start doing things. And then I noticed that his new tour that's coming out is called Super Nature. So we were obviously in the same, I don't know what you call this, zeitgeist or thinking about super. No, he's talking about nature and power of nature and comedy. But I just love this idea of super creativity. And it's something that when I explain it to clients and into the media, it translates. It doesn't matter whether I'm speaking in South America or the Middle East or in Europe or in Asia. It just seems to work. And it's a word that I can own.
I was going to say super to that.
Right.
What could I say? I have to say super. So just going on the topic of artificial intelligence, you actually use AI to understand your audiences. And I've not come across any other speaker that does that. And I saw you demonstrate that at a speech, which is how you and I ended up working together. Could you share a little bit of that for us, and how you use it, and the benefits of that?
Yeah, so I was always intrigued. You know, whenever you get booked to speak on stage, you'll do like a pre-event call. You might do it with the client. You might do it with other stakeholders that are involved in the event itself. And that's great. And I have certain lists of questions I ask the client to understand the audience and what's important to them, what success looks like for them. But that's just the client. It's difficult for you to be able to ask questions of the audience in advance of the event. So like, how can I understand really not just what the client wants, and that can be multiple, because you might have the CEO wants one thing, you might have the person who's organizing the conference wants another thing, you have the event organizer who wants something else, but I really want to know, what does the audience want? What's important to them? So there's a type of artificial intelligence, IBM Watson have it called personality insights, where what you can do is you can use personality insights to analyze an audience or a decision maker. And it's very simple. The way that it works, let's say if I'm giving a pitch, I'm a lawyer and I'm giving a pitch to a client, what I can do is I can take that client's social media account, let's say their Twitter profile, or if they don't have a social media account, 1,000 words that person's spoken or they've written, and I can give it to the AI, and it will give me the psychometrics of that person. It'll tell me what's important, what their values are, what their needs are, what their hot buttons are, essentially. So I thought, well, this is interesting. I wonder if I can apply this to an audience. Now, one of the challenges you have is when you're speaking to an association, they will usually have a social media account for that association, in which case it's very easy. I just give the AI the social media account of the association, and then creates this beautiful report for me. It tells me, okay, this audience here, they really value trust. So I'm going to use more trust indicators in my speech. But if it's, for example, if I'm giving a presentation I do a lot of like smaller groups, 100, 150, they might be senior partners, a financial tax firm, for example. They're not really going to have social media accounts so much. So in that case, what I'll do is I'll choose 2 or 3 individuals that are there. And when I'm researching them, I will essentially find 1,000 words, maybe an interview that they've given or an article they've written for their trade publication. I will give that to the AI to assume that those people are indicative of the overall audience, and it tells me what's important to that person. So it might show, for example, this particular audience, they really value practicality. So as I'm crafting my presentation, I'm going to use more examples of how what I'm describing can be practically applied to build their business. But then what I do is I give the AI my draft keynote, my draft presentation I prepared for that client. And it then basically tells me the psychometrics of the personality of my talk. And then I can overlay the personality of the audience and the personality of my presentation, and I can see what the gaps are. I can see what I need to work on, what needs to be developed. Now, from the audience's perspective, it looks like magic. It looks like, wow, this guy really understands us. He really understands what we're thinking, our problems. It's not magic. It's data that I'm using. And I obviously use that in association with the pre-event calls I do with the client. Now, I have to say, if any speakers are watching this, the AI is not going to tell you how to write your speech. It's not going to craft the highs and lows of a presentation or sales pitch or a keynote, for example. But it will provide you with a kind of evidence-based information that will make you a better presenter of your ideas. And so I think I'm maybe one of the few speakers, maybe the only speaker that does this just now. And audiences love it. And actually, often what I'll do is I'll share that data with the event organizer, because it gives them a little bit of an insight into their audience that they can use for future marketing and future events.
And I've actually been in the audience when you've done that, and I've recognized myself when you were demonstrating it, and it was just absolutely insightful. It was brilliant, and I think more speakers should do it. It's great.
Yeah. That event you were at, because I can remember thinking back to that event, it was actually an event of mostly speakers that were in the room. But what that showed me, the personality of that room, is that those people in the room valued personal freedom very highly, independence, personal freedom. But they actually have quite a big heart. They're quite heart-orientated people as well. So the stories that I used, I think one of the slides was like a picture of this beautiful beach, for example, which identifies this idea of freedom, having this personal freedom. And that's why for the audience, it probably felt like, wow, this, he really understands us, because that's what the data was telling me for that audience.
And this is why you've done so well in such a short time. You understood your audience. I love that. So listen, we've talked about the fact that you've been traveling like crazy. In fact, I'm written down here, you've done 25 speeches in 18 countries in 2 months, which is
Yeah.
just bonkers. Not great for the old carbon offsetting. We'll have to talk about that later.
Yes, exactly.
Yes. But how did you come up with that? How did that speaking tour come about?
So I knew that, in the speaking year of the calendar, there tends to be a couple of periods that are usually pretty strong for events. April, May, maybe going to a bit of June, and then obviously October, November. So I knew that, okay, April, May, I want to make that a period that I'm going to do a real solid blocking of dates. So what I did is I obviously started speaking to bureaus that represent me, that I work with around the world, and said, listen, I'm doing this super creativity thing. I want, trying to book as many events as possible around this date, around this period. Then what I did is we also have what we call our authorized distributors for my training products. So I also reached out to those authorized distributors and said, listen, why don't you bring me in? I'll do a couple of speeches, keynotes for your clients. You get all the back end side of the training piece from it as well. It's a win-win for us. So that was probably about maybe 40%, 30, 40% of the business. And then the other side was we just really ramped up our marketing around, let me think, probably around the very start of the year, especially Ramadan is very early this year. It's a little bit earlier than normal. So I knew that there would be a lot of events that would be happening in April and May in the Middle East. And often in the Middle East, they book very late. So I really did a lot of focusing around targeting potential events, potential people that book speakers around those kind of time periods, because they book very late, unlike a lot of the Americans who tend to have a much longer timeline. So that's why I kind of used all these things together. We did a lot of PPC ads. We did a lot of outreach. We're outreaching probably now 800 leads a month, maybe 1,000 leads a month is what we're reaching out to every single month, my team. So between that, it got enough. And then the other key I always use is something I learned from Brenda Benz, who's a speaker in Singapore, called location maximization. So anytime I get booked to speak in a city, I'm always asking, am I speaking in the morning or am I speaking in the afternoon? What time? And then I can then double up. Let's say I spoke in Istanbul the other day. I spoke in the afternoon, late afternoon. I was a closing keynote speaker. So I was able to find a gig in the morning for a large bank there. So that gets me 2 gigs in one day. So it's maximizing your location.
Brilliant. You're absolutely a genius at this. Fantastic. So tell me, with all this speaking that you've been doing, what sort of trends have you seen in the speaking market? You've talked about the Middle East. You're absolutely right with these slow lead times. You talked about the US with the long. Let's not talk about UK because it's all over the place in terms of lead times. You've got every extreme going on. So what are you seeing in the meetings industry and conferences, etc.?
I think in general, the move is to Asia. That's for a number of factors, because more companies are booking their profits in Asia, or they see where the growth is coming for the business is in Asia. Now, another thing that's happening alongside that is you're getting better conference venues in a lot, especially the B cities in China, for example. And a third thing that also compounds to that is that you are having more people in those regions who are speaking English. Frankly. So all these things kind of come together, that companies, let's say a company from London that's based in London but works globally, they're going to say, let's have our global conference this year in Shanghai or Beijing or Singapore or Bangkok, because more of our profits are going there, and we want to take our people there to see what they're doing in Asia, to see what we can learn from that. Plus you have some great, amazing venues there at the same time. So I think that's one of the big trends, the rise of Asia more generally. I'm speaking a lot now in India. I think India is a little bit behind, but I actually foresee that overtaking China in terms of events. And also we have a little bit of a benefit to us as native English speakers, that in India, they have obviously different languages, but English is a very strong language, and have a very, very big middle class there. So I think India is like a 5 to 10 year play, is what I would say. When it comes to the actual events, I would say I did a online summit. I interviewed 45 of the world's best event organizers, conference organizers. And speaking to them, the big trend that was coming out was more experiential, much more experiential. So I'm always thinking about how to take keynotes, making them more experiential in different ways. The other side is your attendees are social and mobile. So for me as a speaker, I have to recognize the fact that many of the audience there, I'm competing with that Facebook mobile phone they've got in the room. So I'm actually encouraging them to use their mobile phones in my speeches, but to do it in slightly different ways. So for example, I'm often putting up slides and saying, hey, this is, we have a free online course that relates to this. We're going to give everyone in the room, just take a photo of this slide. So I can see all the phones going up, or quotes. I can see, this is the slide that everyone takes photos of, and you can see the phones going up. So there's little things like that, because they're going to be on their phone. So you want them to be, you're recognizing that, more experiential type of events. The other thing I've noticed, I don't know, this is just me, I don't know if this is a trend, is I'm seeing more smaller events, as in those events which are for 100 to 150 people. I'm doing one in Berlin next week, for example. And I don't know, I haven't got any stats or anything to show this, but it feels like there's less huge, big events, but there seems to be a lot more of these smaller events where people are getting together. In this case, it's from one of the world's largest legal firms, and they're bringing all their partners that relate to intellectual property together in one place. I'm seeing a lot more of that. And I love speaking. I'm not one of those speakers that I just want to speak to rooms of like 1,000 people or something. I actually love speaking to those smaller groups because you can do slightly different things.
That's interesting you say that, because I would say 80% of our business is those smaller groups. So it's only the smaller percentage that are the really big conferences. Because you're right, there are more of those, and often those are actually at a more senior level, which is more interesting as well, because the larger groups tend to be more, captive of maybe customers or a different level of audience member. So that's so it is interesting. There are a lot of those about. So you talked about interviewing event organizers, but you also interviewed 125 leading experts who actually are in fact also speakers.
Yeah.
So tell me, why would you do that? And what did you learn from your fellow speakers?
So use that word learn. So for me, one of my highest value is learning and growth. So for me, the first reason I interviewed 125 of the world's best keynote speakers is so I could learn from the best. How did they build their business? And I went into it initially thinking there must be some secret formula that they all do. No, it doesn't exist. There are as many business models for speakers as there are speakers. That's the first thing I got to learn. But what I did find is there's really these 4 areas. Regardless, I speak 125 speakers. They were all over the world, all different topic areas, all different fee levels in terms of what they got as well. But I find of the ones that are working consistently, they have these 4 areas that that they're doing in some sense. They're paying attention to. The first, obviously, is marketing, and that can be in terms of content marketing, social media marketing, their books, whatever the type of marketing they're doing. Second is sales. Now, traditionally, I think this industry has come from more of a sales focus rather than a marketing focused perspective. But I think that's changing now. I think you're seeing a lot more influencers coming into speaking, and they're coming much stronger from a marketing perspective. But I also see the flip side. You need to have those marketing sales working together, because you can have people putting out amazing content and amazing stories and great videos, but then they don't have a sales funnel and a way of converting that into gigs, engagements. And then the third part is craft. Really, one of the very first things I ever learned from a great speaker called Frederick Harron, who I know you represent as well. I'm going to see this weekend. We're both speaking at the same event. He said, the best marketing you can do is to give a great speech.
Absolutely.
And I know I'm giving a great speech when I come off that stage, and in that first minute, I have at least 2 people coming up to me with business cards that are asking to book me. That's how I know my speech is good. Great is a different bar, but in terms of good, I know I'm giving a good speech there. So craft, like I spend hours working on the craft piece, everything from blocking, which on stage in terms of crafting the speeches. I work with people who are specialists in terms of voice. I work with specialists in terms of humor, for example. So craft is a really key thing there. And then the final part is profitability. And this is where I think we're in an up cycle. Maybe not necessarily, it doesn't feel like it's in the UK, but certainly in the States at the moment, they're in an up part at the moment in the business. And there's a lot of work, there's a lot of opportunity, but that's only going to last for so long. We'll see a crash. It happens every so often, every few years. And what I see is too many speakers have only focused on the speaking bit, the keynote bit, for example, and that's going to cause them a problem when we go down. And so I'm very keen. We're always adding in other areas of profitability for our business, whether that's training, trainer side of things, or subscription related things. Or I actually just heard of one the other day which blew my mind. I was having dinner with a speaker in Bogota in Colombia, and he was telling me about something that they do where it's basically added about $6 million to their revenues every year in addition to his speaking fees. And it's essentially, it's very simple, but the way that he does it is beautiful. It's when you come off stage and the client is at a heightened state, and you say to the client, okay, that's great. Speaking on great is great. And everyone's really excited, but how do we continue this journey? And what they offer to do is some type of a weekly video series for all of the employees in order to, at the start of every week, if it's a sales team, to get their mindset right, short 5-minute videos, and they'll sell those for $10,000 to $20,000. And if you do it in the right way, and if it's good quality, I mean, he's booking about an extra $6 million that weren't there before. And so there's profitability is a really key thing. I think a lot of speakers leave out.
Yeah, no, you're spot on. You're absolutely right, and you're totally correct. I interrupted you because I was excited when you said that. When you come off stage, if there's people with business cards and they're waving them at you, which is exactly what happened. I was waving my business card at you when you came off stage when I first saw you. So yeah, you're getting it right. So that's brilliant.
Yeah, and another speaker you represent, who I had a conversation with yesterday, was a great speaker, Jamil Qureshi, and Jamil and I were talking yesterday, and his one, which is slightly different in terms of using that first minute, or he calls it like 15 minutes of coming off stage, that is the perfect time to recommend another speaker.
Yeah.
Or a bureau saying, listen, you put me through Maria, for example. She has a great speaker called Blah. I think she would be perfect, this other speaker, for your event next year. Really ties in really well. If you get them that point, because they're in that state and they're thinking about it, and you're being valuable, you're offering value there to the client.
Yeah, especially because if you've gone down well, you then know who the next person would be, who would work and resonate, and and you understand the audience. He's absolutely right. He's very clever too. You two would be dangerous together. So I think there's a plot afoot. Anyway, so the other thing I want to ask you, you've doubled the amount of business you've got through bureaus, and I mean, I'm obviously one of those bureaus. How have you done that?
So whenever I tell speakers this, and they always hate this idea at the first. So it depends on whether you're in this business in a short term or whether you're in the long game. I'm personally in the long game for this. Even when I worked in the music industry, most of the people I work with them for 20 plus years. So I'm in for building long-term relationships. So that what I do is, often when inquiries come into me initially, especially if it's in a new territory or a number of different factors, I will often give that work, even though it's coming directly, I'll give that to a bureau initially. Especially if it's a new bureau I've just started working with, I will give them a few leads that are coming in, just to see how well they can convert those leads coming into actual bookings. So I'm kind of testing them that way. It's also showing good intent from my perspective. And also I want to see if I start to see gigs coming back the other way. Now, most bureaus are very good. Most bureaus will actually, like yourself as well, you'll start to see things coming the other way. Some bureaus, they don't want to do that. And that's fine. They might have exclusive speakers, in which case, that's okay. And you leave it at that. That's the first point, I would say. The second point is, whenever I can't do a gig, or I'm frankly not the right speaker for the event, what I did right at the start is I would recommend another speaker. Now, the problem with that is that I am not best placed to recommend another speaker all the time, because I usually am a keynote speaker. There's lots of different speakers we know, but I'm usually a keynote. So I'm often given the opening or the closing keynote. So I'm lucky if I even get to see the other keynote speaker. Never mind any other speakers. So I'm not the best person sometimes to say, this is another good speaker to recommend on this other topic. So what I suggest you do, if you get an inquiry in, you can't do, or you're not the right speaker, rather than directing it to another speaker, direct it to a bureau. Make the introduction to a bureau and say, hey, unfortunately I can't do this date, but I'd like you to introduce you to Maria. She represents some amazing speakers on my topic area, or this topic that I think was right for your particular event. Maria, take it from here. Done. Your work is done. And someone like you have a much better understanding of who's good out there and who's right for this particular client. I know you spend a lot of time doing what we call scoping what the brief is as well. Where speakers, we tend to be not as good at that type of work.
Well, and also it's very clever because, of course, in you doing that, you're back on my radar every time. And when you give me an inquiry, which is exactly how we started working, even though I'd seen you speak, you passed us off at the first inquiry. It allows us to have the first experience without taking any risk. Yeah. Because the problem with the Bureau is that when you're booking a speaker for the very first time, the first question the client's going to ask you is, well, where have they worked for you so far? Have you worked with them before? How did it go? And it's very difficult to say, well, actually, I haven't yet. So if you're passing me the first inquiry, I haven't got that barrier at all. Yeah. And then I've got the experience, or one of my team has got the experience, and we're working with you. We know how you work and we understand it. So no, it's very clever. And surely if you're passing it to a bureau and there are other people in the bureau, that opens doors. In fact, I know for you, it opened doors to the London Speaker Bureau entire network. And that's one of the reasons that you were in Asia. So
exactly.
Meeting with Harry, I think.
And I also think, there's another thing and this only relates to certain types of speakers. If you are a politician or an economist or someone who's based senior in business, you are always thinking about reputational risk for going and speaking to different clients. So I work with another a bureau in Asia, and there, something came in the other day via them, and she said to me, "Listen, James, they can do the fee, but I've got some questions about this particular client. Here's why." And it's like, oh, okay, now. Me as a lone speaker would never have known that information, but you being a speaker on the ground in Europe, for example, you know so many of these clients because you've worked with them before, and you can tell. Well, let's say if it's a bank, well, actually, this part of the bank is actually great to work with, but this bit is a bit more difficult. They have some challenges that are going on, and this is information that individual speakers on themselves don't really have. It requires a bureau to have that information.
But also, we were talking earlier about the fact that you've done so much in such a short time. A lot of speakers out there are lone speakers, but you've got an entire team behind you, haven't you? What's your setup?
So I talk about this on stage. I talk about this idea of the lone creative genius and why I believe it's a total myth. And people will they'll argue with me about this and everything, but I believe it's a myth because I've been on the road with so many artists over the years where they're on stage, they have the microphone, the spotlight is on them. As an audience member, you just get to see them on stage, but you don't get to see the 100 to 200 people backstage who are just as much a part of making it a successful and a creative show as the person with the microphone in their hand. So I take the same approach in terms of how I build a business. So, okay, I might be the person on the stage with the microphone in my hand, but it takes a team to build this. So in my case, I have a very small team. And I noticed most speakers do not have a team at all, which means that when you're speaking on stage or when an inquiry is coming in, you're traveling, there's no one there answering the phone. There's no one there responding to things. That's speed is so important for this. So what I have a team. I mentioned my wife. She's a lawyer, so she does a lot of contracts and the financial side of things. I have another member of my team whose sole responsibility is finding opportunities and leads. I have another member of the team whose responsibility is around creating content, video and audio content. He edits every single video, every single keynote presentation I give. We film it and he edits that so I can watch that back and critique it as well. Now, you can't do that unless you have someone, a member of the team, to be able to do that. I have another person who does all our design, our Facebook, our Google ads, PPC, and another person that does SEO. This means that, single me as a speaker, I can project a much bigger thing because I've got a team behind me. And all my team, with the exception of my wife, are in the Philippines. So it doesn't cost that much to build a virtual team around you. And I've been actually advising a number of other speakers who've kind of been doing it on their own. I just said, listen, you're missing a trick here. You're spending all your time booking flights or, doing these other things you shouldn't really be doing. And you can be much more efficient.
Fantastic. And finally, you've given so much advice to speakers throughout this chat, but if you were to go back to James 2 years ago when he was starting out on this journey and building up his speaking, what advice would you give to yourself, or what would you do differently maybe?
I would be cautious on accepting advice from other speakers, because many speakers that you initially go to for advice, they have started building a speaking business 10 years ago. We're in a different space now. We're in Instagram. You know, a lot of event organizers that reach out to me, they might find me on Instagram, for example. Didn't exist a few years ago. So I'd be a little bit more cautious about what advice I took. But what I would do is I would find just two speakers, someone ideally that's maybe a little bit ahead of you and where you want to get to, that next step up. For me, I know the person that was really impactful was Frederick Harron. Now, Frederick and I speak on the same topic. We come at it from very different perspectives. But he was where I said, and I thought, I like the way that he built his business, and he's got huge integrity as a person as well. So he's the person I looked up to initially. So have someone like that, someone you look up to, you want to get to, but also have someone behind you that's younger often, that's kicking you up the backside, that's forcing you to continually think about how you can become, you know, better at what you do, more skillful, more efficient at what you do. And believe me, there's no lack of people coming up behind. And some of the best ones I've seen recently are actually in Asia. I've just come back from Singapore, event 250 speakers in Asia, and there's some phenomenal speakers that are coming out that are now starting to come from outside of Asia and go into the more global speaking community.
That's brilliant advice, and a great note to end on, because the older you get, there are more people behind you kicking you up the backside.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, James.
My pleasure. Thanks.